Gulchish, Lakat Yuhan, Hat Yi Adi, Wedech Yagi, Gulchish, Lakat Yuhan, Yakecha, Sakudzi Awe, Tutke, Sakudzi, Yidat Kwa, Hatuasigu, Gach, Haji Yewuti, Yahayanwat, Kakathat. We'd like Florence Shakely to give us a prayer to start the day.
Gulchish. Yaigi Rosita Worl Adaptation. Ha inkwan in a seat zutat Yaigi. Yalakatia Octasne at Sultiden Hajitsaha. Ya Christi Diagituna Hadachkonik is Yanjis. Aya Hajik Etiko Sultiden Hajitsaha. Ya hayuk atangi dak ejitune kaya at hakikat tikhitso atunal kidensta yutu datang hajit sa hartsati kaya hat kuatini ku hasta in khinaste kaya hakut kliniku ku hasta in khinastil takat has takat kaya nikia cancer jik atso hat goed kennis naar zati. Hekati is the sai tunach. Amen.
Amen. Gulchish Kakathat. Gedenach iau setu you Kakathat. Singit Chenach. Gulchish. Florence is a really, really wonderful Tlingit teacher. And she's, just her and her family has just taught me so much and taught so many of all of us. So just it's wonderful to hear, start off the day with one of our elders speaking in Tlingit for a prayer to just help us throughout this conference. It's wonderful. I'm just going to make a few announcements, and I really want to keep the time for another of our elders that's going to share. Ka Honey, Rosita Worl, is going to be our keynote speaker this morning. But I'd just like to make a few announcements just to keep the things in order. One of them is the availability of Ken Hoff. Is he, if you want to wave again, if he's close by, Ken. He normally stands right up about there and close to the door. Wonderful guy from Southern Tlingit Territory. And his phone number, his cell number is on page 5, where you see conference at a glance, transportation between venues provided throughout the conference. Call 907-723-9007. There's Ken over there. See, there we go, right on. So that's what this is about, is this work to support our elders, support our people. Ken is one of those warm faces who's doing the work. So if you want to call him and get any kind of transportation to and from the venues, please do. And he's just here on support. Gulchish Ken. Okay, and we really want to plug the lunch tickets. If you want to get a ticket for lunch, there's plenty of food. Cordelia Kelly. I'm wondering if she is in the room at the moment. I have not had a chance to meet her in person yet, but I know Cordelia Kelly is a wonderful, amazing Inupiaq woman. And so this conference, the theme of indigenous perspectives on climate change, and with the Inuit of the circumpolar north just really at the forefront of speaking out on global climate change. And we know when we talk about our clan migration histories, when we talk about our relationship to the land and all of that experiential knowledge, it in many cases surpasses anything that the PhDs, anything that the scientists could provide. In some cases with the depth that which it provides. And so when we work together with the Western academics, the scholars, on equal footing, recognizing that it's an indigenous intellectual tradition, you know, rather than just one other thing, another subject that they can include or not include, but it's its own thing. Anyway, Cordelia Kelly is involved with the Sealaska College, a tribal college. So that's also been a dream that's been long-standing here, a dream of my father's, Andrew Hope III, to establish a tribal college here in Southeast. Really just if we can work together, how much of an opportunity we have when we can work together. You know, and not just in the speeches, but behind the scenes. We still lift each other up and create opportunities for each other. We can make a tribal college, and I hope we'll receive some of that hope and vision when Cordelia speaks on that. And we wanted to announce the video documentation, KTOO, underwritten by a lot of funding from Gold Belt Heritage Foundation, is providing this really wonderful service of KTOO with high quality filming. And that's gonna all go on YouTube. You know, there's a Sharing Our Knowledge YouTube page that you can search, and you'll even find many of the presentations from previous years if you haven't already seen this. So that's the idea here, sharing our knowledge, you know, so in this space here, and as well as we can create great documentation. Okay, so those are the announcements. I would like to now, I'm just so pleased, and I really want to make sure we have just all the time we need to hear from Ka Honey. Rosita Worl, I just want to say, has been such a supporter of myself all through since I, teenager, and I've seen her support and raise up and have a vision. One thing I get excited about is wanting to make Juneau the Northwest Coast capital of the world. You know, we could dream big, and we could work together and do these kind of things. It doesn't need to just be all the funding and all the support and resources in a place like Vancouver. It could be here in Juneau, and seeing that example from Rosita, and seeing the close collaboration from Sealaska Heritage Institute with all of the multiple organizations just coming together to make this thing happen. And Rosita and SHI and their staff, many of them are here today, being there and being supportive. So, ye awe, Gunalchish, Rosita will share her talk, Blood Quantum, Inclusion or Exclusion, Survival or Extinction. All right, Gunalchish.
Gunalchish, Ishmael, I always call him by his father. Most honorable people, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I have to say this is my first time at a clan conference. And I'm very happy that it was people like Ishmael and others who served on that committee who made it possible for me to attend. It's a very significant conference in terms of kind of reassessing where we are as Native people, identifying issues that are affecting us on a daily basis, looking at where our children are going, assessing the status of our language, and the many, many things that continue to assault us as Native people. So I want to congratulate the organizers of the Clan Conference for their continuing good work. Gunnachish. I think I shrunk because or either they got a higher podium here. I have to tell you this, that my dear auntie or grandma, Florence Shakely, at one point in time came and kind of reprimanded me, and she has that right to do that. And she said that it is important for you to introduce yourselves. And this is something that we have taught our children to do. So in honor of my dear auntie, Florence Shakely Slukachadi, I'd like to go ahead and do that. In our traditional society, someone who was of an opposite moiety would introduce me. Today, we have identified new protocols since we cannot always be assured that someone of the proper moiety will be present to introduce us. Yedeklatsak kakahani yuchatu asak, jak na ayachat, shangu kwedi na chatsati, kaudli yayi hit dach ayachat, jishkat kwan ayachat, slukachadi dachhank ayachat. My Tlingit name is Yedeklatsak. It's an ancient name that has been handed down through generations of our clan, and its meaning has been lost in antiquity. My ceremonial name is Kahani. This name recalls an historical event involving intertribal trade, and it speaks to the status of women in our society. The name Kahani also reflects the bonds that exist between clans. A Kagwantan child was given the name Kahani after her best friend, a Shangukwedi, who held this name, died. Generations later, the name was returned to the Shangukwedi and given to me in a ceremony. I am an eagle of the Thunderbird clan and the house lowered from the sun in Klukwan in the Chelkat region. I am a grandchild of the Sockeye clan. I am entitled to use the eagle, thunderbird, sun clan crests and the white bear, killer whale, and shark spirit designs. In addition, our clan claims ownership rights to the U.S. Naval military uniform and to the name Lieutenant Frederick Schwatka. Under our law, because Lieutenant Schwatka failed to pay a debt to my great-great-clan grandfather, the Thunderbird claimed his name and the naval uniform or semblances of them as a liability payment. Explanations of our introductions can also be used to provide insight into our culture. I will also use my self-identity as an introduction to this presentation. Change and adaptation. In the past, someone from the opposite side, eagle or raven, would introduce us. And that's based on our value as if you are worthy of being known, people will know who you are, and you don't have to talk about yourself. Someone else will do that. Because our world has expanded, we are often in places where we cannot be assured that someone from the opposite moiety will be present. We develop new protocols, and it is now acceptable and even necessary to introduce ourselves. Our history has demonstrated that adaptations or the accommodations to sociocultural and economic changes has proven to be an important attribute of the Southeast Alaska Indians and has contributed to our cultural survival. Our group orientation. We conceive of ourselves not only as individuals, but more importantly as members of our clans. Our behavior and laws reflect a group orientation. The group orientation is one of our major differences between our society and the American society, whose values and laws are based on individualism. Names and crests are owned by clans. In the case of the Shungukredi, the name Schwatka was taken and transformed into Tlingit as Schwatki, my Schwatki. And his military uniform was also taken as a liability payment for Lieutenant Schwatka's debt to our clan. The Daklawedi, Deshitan, and Kagwantan clans have also claimed the military uniform because of debts owed to them by the military. Our art is more than aesthetics. We wear jewelry, clothing, regalia that have our crest designs. The designs or crests identify us as to who we are. Our word for art is atnane, meaning an iconic event or a great happening. And I acknowledge that Ken Grant in our Council of Traditional Scholars used this word and recalled that Lily White had used this word atnane to signify our art. And this is an important thing because we have said many times that we have no word for art, but it is that we didn't discover what the word was art. The iconic event is a spiritual encounter between a human and a supernatural being. A visual representation of the event is created and is ceremoniously transformed and adopted as a clan crest. Our names create bonds between us and our ancestors and future generations. Our names are owned by our clans. They have been used by our ancestors and are transferred down through the generations. Our names will be transferred to future generations and bind us to them. We have a symbolic immortality and will live on through future generations. Names have spiritual dimensions. We call the names of our ancestors during our ceremonies to beckon their spirits to join us, just as future generations will call our names after our death. Our crests are tangible and spiritual relationships to our land, environment, universe, and the wildlife. In my case, the eagle, thunderbird, sun, shark, and killer whale. In our culture, our children have rights to land because of their membership in our clans which own land. Wuchiach. We are children of our father's clan, not just of our individual biological father. We are children of our father's clan, and again emphasizes the group orientation of our society. We recognize and honor our father's clan. Our values and practices require social and spiritual balances between opposite clans. As we can see by our own tribal introductions, Native identity is based on culture, values, traditions, and homeland. Native identity is a set of beliefs and practices held by an interacting community and transferred through millennia of generations. Native identity is based on commitment to ancestral homelands, to one's communities, ceremonies, traditions, and practices that are passed from generation to generations and is assumed to be perpetual. Native determination is based on our culture or membership in a tribe or clan in our traditional society. Native identity is not tied to blood quantum. While Alaska Native people collectively identify themselves in their Native self-designations as real people, Natives were to be identified as, quote, uncivilized tribes with the signing of the 1867 Treaty of Cession between the United States and Russia. 20 years later, the blood quantum system was introduced into American public policy and law and applied to Native Americans under the General Allotment Act of 1887. Under the Allotment Act, Indian reservations were divided into 160 acres for tribal members. Any remaining lands, some 90 million acres, were transferred into the public domain. The twofold purpose of the Allotment Act was, first, to obtain tribal land for Americans, and to civilize and assimilate the Indians by introducing them to the concept of private property that was to be held by individuals rather than the community-based membership of tribes. The concept of blood quantum references the portion of an individual's genetic heritage that is presumed to come from a Native American. Blood quantum was also used by the federal government as a measure of competency or assimilation. If a Native American was less than 50% Native blood, he or she was deemed to be competent, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs was not required to supervise the allottee or to have a legal trust responsibility over the allottee and his allotment. The allottee was free to sell his or her allotment. However, a Native with 50% or more Native blood was viewed as incompetent and required BIA supervision. The federal government began to systematically apply the blood quantum system to determine Native identity as a criteria to determine eligibility to enroll in Native entities and or to participate in Native programs. It is used by the federal government primarily for the purposes of determining eligibility for benefits arising from treaties or federal policies. Tribal and Native entities have also adopted the blood quantum criteria to determine the eligibility for membership and for various benefits. Blood quantum has become an issue of increasing concern and interest in the Native community. This presentation analyzes blood quantum, which is a criteria that is used to determine eligibility to enroll into a tribe or an Alaska Native corporation and to participate in Native programs. I maintain that given the historical trend of diminishing Native blood among Native Americans and Alaska Natives, as the data below will demonstrate, together with the application of blood quantum criteria to determine Native identity, eligibility, or membership on Native blood quantum can lead to a path of ultimate extinction of a tribe or a cultural group. I will close by proposing an alternative solution. Before I continue my discussion on blood quantum, I should add one more historical fact that sought to suppress our Native identity and culture. The qualifications for citizenship under the Territorial Act of 1915, Alaska Natives were required to meet the following: to pass a test demonstrating qualifications to exercise the obligations of a voter, to abandon tribal customs and sever tribal relations, to adopt the habits of civilization, to be certified by 5 white citizens, to solemnly swear to forever renounce all tribal customs and relationships. And on the screen here, you will see the certificate of my grandfather, John Sanat. It wasn't until the Citizenship Act was in 1924 that citizenship was granted to American Indians and Alaska Natives. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement of 1971 adopted the 1/4 blood quantum criteria based on previous federal legislation and BI definitions establishing the criteria for American Indians that were the common practice of the federal government at the time of the passage of ANCSA. ANCSA also included, in the absence of a minimum blood quantum, citizens who are regarded as an Alaska Native by the Native village or Native group of which the individual claimed to be a member and whose father or mother is, or if deceased was, regarded as Native. ANCSA excluded Tsimshians who are enrolled with the Metlakatla Indian community. ANCSA created a new ethnic identity. They legally created a new ethnic identity with the designation of Native or Alaska Native. An Alaska Native is an individual who is a person of 1/4 degree or more Alaska Indian, including Tsimshians not enrolled in the Metlakatla Indian community, Eskimo or Aleut, or a combination thereof. The ability to combine blood quantum differs from other Native American tribes that require 1/4 Native blood quantum from a single tribe. It is possible for an Indian to be a full-blooded Native American, but not eligible to enroll into his or her mother's or father's tribe, who are enrolled to different tribes. The standard legal reference to Indian that remains in the federal statutes is assumed to include the Eskimos and Aleuts, or the Inupiat, Yupik, Alutiiq, and Anungan. This designation also fails to acknowledge that the Inupiat, Yupik, Alutiiq, and Anungan are distinct ethno-linguistic groups separate from Indians. The term Alaska Natives arose from a construction needed by the federal government to have a term that includes all ethno-linguistic and cultural groups in Alaska. The ANCSA 1987 amendment. Based on their cultural values, Sealaska, among other Native corporations, sought to amend ANCSA to allow Natives who were born after 1971 to enroll as shareholders into ANCs. In all Alaska Native societies, children are born as members of their tribes with all the attendant rights of an adult tribal member, meaning that they own land in the same way that their fathers and mothers do. The amendment defined descendant of Native as a lineal descendant of a Native or of an individual who would have been a Native if such individual were alive on December 18, 1971, or an adoptee of a Native or a descendant of a Native, whose adoptions A, occurred before his or her majority, and B, is recognized at law in equity. In this case, the Native could have been 1/4 blood quantum, thus his or her lineal descendant could be less than 1/4 blood quantum. In June of 2007, Sealaska shareholders voted on a resolution to allow for the enrollment of shareholder descendants who were born after 1971 and who are 1/4 Alaska Natives. That vote was 57.22% who voted yes. 41.06% voted no. It was a significant vote in that it is what I have called an assimilationist indicator. The vote pitted the communal ownership of property of tribes versus the individual ownership of the American society. Recall that Congress viewed the ANCSA as a vehicle to assimilate Alaska Natives into the Western society with corporations, cash, and private property. The Native leadership and community rejected Congress's goal and moved to amend ANCSA or to re-tribalize ANCSA. They successfully sought to include their cultural values, including the enrollment of their children into Native corporations, and also had land protections. In the resolution adopted by Sealaska shareholders, the 1/4 Native blood quantum eligibility requirement to become a shareholder was maintained, although Natives who were less than 1/4 Native blood could inherit or be gifted stock. Sealaska was required to project the impacts of the 207 potential enrollment of shareholder descendants who were born after the initial enrollment and who are 1/4 Native blood quantum. Sealaska, under the direction of the Shareholder Relations Committee, authorized 2 demographic studies. The first study presented hard data on the blood quantum of the original group of Sealaska shareholders who were required to be a minimum of 1/4 blood quantum under the ANCSA definition of Native. It also reported on their descendants who were born between 1974 and 2001. The table below reflects that by 2001, the shareholder descendant population with less than 1/4 blood quantum had reached 30%. By 2001, the total population of less than 1/4 blood quantum had reached 30%. The second study was designed to project the blood quantum through 2008. The numbers were based on assumptions from the previous hard data on actual blood quantum projections. The study projected that by 2004, there would be 21,468 descendants, of which slightly less than 1/2, or 46%, would be less than the 1/4 blood quantum. The study further projected that by 2008, there would be 59% with less than the 1/4 blood quantum. So there you could see the numbers in 2004, 46%, 2008, 59%. The 1/4 blood quantum also surfaced as an issue of concern under the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. The MMPA Alaska Native exemption to hunt marine mammals was set at the 1/4 Native blood quantum. In 2016, Sealaska Heritage conducted a study entitled Determination of Native Status under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, led by Dr. Steve Langdon, to determine the effects of the MMPA on Alaska Natives. The table on the following slide, which is abstracted from the study, reports that on the Certificate of Determination of Indian Blood that were issued during a 10-year period, between 2006 to 2016 to Alaska Natives. In the Sealaska regions, CDIBs were issued to 3,684 Alaska Natives who were less than 1/4, or 32% of all enrollees from 2006 to 2016. The table does not reflect the cumulative number of Alaska Natives in Southeast Alaska with less than 1/4 native blood quantum, but only those who obtain the CDIB during the 10-year period. When the 2005 Sealaska data are compared to the CDIB enrollment from 2006 to 2016, the Sealaska projection of 59% appears to overstate the increase in the Sealaska descendants with less than the 1/4 blood quantum than was expected. However, the comparison may not be valid since the CDIB enrollment as 32% less than 1/4 blood quantum does not, in all likelihood, account for all of the Sealaska shareholder descendants who are living outside of Alaska and who did not enroll under the BIA. Another source of data on blood quantum can be abstracted from the Sealaska Scholarship Program. The following table contrasts the scholarship recipients reporting on native blood quantum between the academic years of 2011 to 2012 and to 2019-2020. In academic year 2011 to 2012, 38.5% were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. In 2019 to 2020, that number rose to 45.8% who were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. Unfortunately, no similar data exists for shareholders and shareholder descendants who did not apply for a scholarship. However, one could conceivably make the conjecture that the same percent of less than the 1/4 native blood quantum applies to this population in the same age range of 18 to 25 years old. Questions have been also raised about the differences between the number of scholarships applicants from Alaska and those from outside. The chart at the right reviews the differences between those living in Alaska and those living outside. And you can see that they're almost equal between the inside and outside of Alaska. The chart at the right reviews the difference in the 1/4 native blood quantum between those recipients living in Alaska and those living outside of Alaska, and the difference in their blood quantum during the past 6 years. If we just look at the last year in 2019, we could see that 61% were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum lived out of state. 61% of those living out of state were less than the 1/4. While in Alaska, 39% less than 1/4 native blood. So in Alaska, it's at the 39%. So there is a pretty significant difference between those living and outside of Alaska, not too surprising. As of September 24th, 2019, the total number of Sealaska shareholders and shareholder descendants is 22,527. Of this number, shareholder descendants account for 5,735. Shareholder descendants are required to have 1/4 blood quantum to enroll. However, shareholder descendants who are less than the 1/4 blood quantum may have inherited or have been gifted stock and are Sealaska shareholders. The total number of Sealaska shareholders and descendants with less than 1/4 blood quantums totals 3,820 and represents 17% of the shareholder population. This number does not include the total number of Southeast Alaska Natives who are less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. I thought it'd be interesting to look at the variability in the Sealaska programs, the eligibility requirements. For a Sealaska director, all current Sealaska Board of Directors are at least 1/4 blood quantum, and it is assumed that all candidates who have run for the board were also at least 1/4 blood quantum. The assumption has been that Sealaska directors must have the 1/4 native blood quantum. However, in examining the bylaws, the requirement is that the director hold voting shares. Such voting shares may be held by shareholders who are less than the 1/4 blood quantum. The 1/4 blood quantum is not a requirement to serve as a director. I think that was a surprise to a lot of us when I first did this analysis. Shareholder descendants, to be eligible as a shareholder descendant, individuals must be a lineal descendant of an original shareholder and have the 1/4 native blood quantum. Interns, to be eligible to serve as a Sealaska intern, they are not required to have the 1/4 blood quantum. The board youth advisor, to be eligible to serve as the board youth advisor, individuals are required to have a minimum of 1/4 native blood. For scholarships, shareholders and shareholders' descendants, without regard to a minimum blood quantum, are eligible for Sealaska Sealaska scholarships. So there you could see in that table the summary: 1/4 required, 1/4 native blood quantum required is required for Sealaska descendants, and board youth advisor. The 1/4 not required are for Sealaska directors, interns, and scholarships. The data from the Sealaska projection of shareholder descendants, the MMPA study, and the Sealaska scholarship recipients, the study of the Sealaska scholarship recipients, clearly points to an increasing number of Southeast Alaska natives who are less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. It also points to an increasing number of Southeast Alaska natives who will not be eligible to enroll into Sealaska Corporation under the current eligibility requirements. The following are the different criteria Sealaska could consider in the enrollment of shareholder descendants should it elect to open up the enrollment to descendants with less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. They first could reduce the blood quantum to 1/8 or less. However, the historical trend in diminishing native blood suggests that the 1/8 blood quantum requirement may become problematic in the near future, or actually it may already be here. The second criteria would be to use the lineal descendant from an original Sealaska shareholder criteria without regard to blood quantum. Adoption of the lineal descendant approach will in part comply with the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida Indians of Alaska eligibility requirement for membership that requires the applicant to provide legal documentation that they are of Tlingit and or Haida descent. A blood requirement is not applicable, and it also does not include the Tsimshians enrolled to Metlakatla. The lineal descendant criteria does not ensure that the individuals will meet a cultural native determination, which will become more apparent with the trend of an increasing number of shareholders and shareholder descendants living outside of Alaska on a permanent basis or a longer duration. The third method would be to implement regarded as an Alaska Native by the Native village or Native group, which was allowed under ANCSA in those instances in which a 1/4 blood quantum could not be established. This criteria regarded as an Alaska Native may serve to meet a cultural Native determination, but would be difficult to operationalize. This approach is more conducive to tribes to implement. 2 Native regional corporations have adopted resolutions to allow for the enrollment of descendants who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. Arctic Slope. Arctic Slope Regional Corporation provides for 2 different types of stock based on blood quantum. One type is for those who are 1/4 and more Native blood quantum, and the other stock are for those who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. Sealaska Corporation has the lowest number of Natives who are less than 1/4 blood quantum. According to the report on the number who are issued CDIBs during the 26 to 2016 period, the number of Natives with less than 1/4 Native blood quantum was 7.5%. Interestingly, Sealaska provides for the enrollment of lineal descendants. With the increasing number of Southeast Alaska Natives who are less than 1/4 Native blood quantum and are not eligible for enrollment into Sealaska, I would conclude that we will begin to experience pressure to bring another vote to shareholders to enroll shareholder descendants who are less than the 1/4 blood quantum. Additionally, since the last vote to enroll shareholder descendants in 2007, 12 years ago, we have witnessed a resurgence and a revitalization in cultural and language teaching and practice. We are creating a younger body of children and youth who are no more about their cultural identity, but yet will not be members of the corporation. However, this has been accompanied by a vocal number of shareholders, evident on social media, who appear to place preeminence on individualism and the adoption of Western corporations. One could surmise that this population would reject the Native corporation models that the shareholders voted in the 2007 vote to enroll shareholder descendants born after 1971, and the 2009 vote to provide additional shares and benefits to elders. Our ancestors fought for the protection and ownership of our land for future generations, as they saw land as the underlying foundation of our cultural survival. They chose not to wage war against the United States in 1867, but instead sought ways through Western institutions to protect our land ownership. The Sealaska shareholders voted in 2007 to re-tribalize Sealaska as a Native institution. They challenged Congress's attempt to assimilate Alaska Natives and successfully sought to enroll shareholder descendants born after 1971. Changing the shareholder descendant 1/4 blood eligibility will require an amendment to the Sealaska Articles of Incorporation through a shareholder vote. From my personal perspective, based on the hard data, unless we enroll shareholder descendants who are less than the 1/4 blood quantum into Sealaska, which holds the tribal assets, our tribal assets entrusted to this generation by our ancestors, and unless we amend the MMPA and other governmental programs that provide protections and benefits to Alaska Natives, we will witness the exclusion of a significant number of Southeast Alaska Natives who are our children, our grandchildren, and those yet to come. The question that must be posed and answered: Could this ultimately lead to our cultural extinction? In the long term, in my humble opinion, I would have to answer yes. Gunnar Tisch. I'm glad I'm not running for the board. Go ahead. Thank you.
Artlein Gunnar Tisch, Kahani. Artlein Gunnar Tisch. I think that is so fantastic for those who, staying through the course of this conference, you start to trace a cultural and intellectual lineage that Rosita so finely illustrated for us, where you start to see the historical ties between clans, federally recognized tribes, the native corporations, and just how we organize ourselves to this day, and to raise those questions about how we maintain our sovereignty, how we maintain those trusts to the land that Rosita talked about. Very, very special. Listening to Rosita, I remembered Kat'atk, and I know there's some people from Sitka here. There's Dastaya, Du Ishawe, Ethel Makinen, one of our elders. Her father was Kat'atk from the Kukitan, Kagwantan. In 1980, at a Sealaska Elders Conference, he said, Chutluk dach, ha kina keu tusi nuk, ha dachkank isani, heltsu kushtuyach wasa atutlitzin, hastu jide gachtuti. That from long ago, we would raise up our grandchildren. It didn't matter what we valued. We would just give it to them. And so thinking of this and the values and the retention of the values, it's special to see Kahani illustrate that to us, and to see the continuation of the wisdom and strength and knowledge of our people and of our elders. Ye aweh. It's wonderful at this moment we're just going to take a break and be able to get into our next parts of the conference. I would like to announce the tour that's going to be on Sunday. If I get this all correct, look at the schedule. That's going to be meeting at the UAS Glacier View Room at 10:30 on Sunday. But this is going to be, if you want to listen for this, anyone who wants to go to this tour who is registered for this conference, it'll be a first come, first serve who signs up type situation. We also want to keep in mind our elders, consider them, those who want to go on that tour, and you would sign up and receive a pass through Ann Metcalf at the registration. And I'm hoping that I said that all correctly. If Peter can be 10 a.m. at the Glacier View Room. Hopefully, if Peter and Alice are hearing and if I'm saying that correctly. So go check with Ann if you want to go to that tour. I think I'm probably going to hurry over to Ann and sign up myself and maybe a few of my family. So, Gunnar Tisch, we're taking a break. Reconvene for the next parts to the onward to the breakout sessions.